Mykhailo Podoliak, advisor to the Chief of Staff of the President of Ukraine, a member of the Ukrainian negotiation team at the peace talks with the Russian Federation. Mr. Mykhailo, good health to you. Good day. Greetings. Greetings to all the journalists. My first question is about your impression from the last rounds of peace talks with the Russian Federation. What are the key takeaways? The key takeaways is that we have begun to talk pragmatics. There's a lot of discussion, there could be a lot of fantasizing, but we know the condition of Ukraine, we've been fighting for 34 days one on one against the powerful army of Russia. We know that the fantasies be fantasies, but we need pragmatically to have the allies who'll be with us when we need assistance here and now. We are talking constructively now. We are talking constructively, and it will not be fantasies, but a specific security guarantees agreement made with countries that will take international legal obligations. And if a country attempts to attack us anytime in the future, we are in a state of war, and we can bring this war to an end. And in the future, we will also have clear structured protection in place. So I feel it is important that if we sign the international multilateral treaty about security guarantees for Ukraine, Ukraine will finally have its army, which is fighting mightily today, but also have security guarantees from the allies standing with Ukraine. And those are the countries that we are suggesting as security guarantees. They have their powerful armies with a nuclear deterrent. So in the future, no one would think that they could conquer Ukraine in 3 or 5 days. That hasn't happened, as we see that the Russian Federation isn't as mighty as they alleged to be. They are good at fighting their own civilians, and they are using civilians as a means of warfare in Ukraine. But my impression is optimistic, based on the Istanbul round of negotiations. For your negotiating team, what are the priorities set by the president and by Ukraine? We have two parallel processes that are clearly synchronized by the president. The negotiations, as any war always entails, a negotiation track, and the second track is the defense mounted by the armed forces of Ukraine. They bring uh, victories that we can use as negotiation levers. If during the first round of negotiations Russia spoke the language of ultimatums, and they thought that they would complete their aggressive special operations very soon, which was war indeed. Now we have a very clear, very specific construction that we have been that we have received owing to the Ukrainian army, and we've sidetracked the Russian demands. Russia has sidetracked its demands because they realize they need to be talking to Ukraine on different terms, and everything pertaining to sovereignty, territorial integrity is non-negotiable for us. And this is stated by the president. He sets the terms for us. We are pragmatic. And pragmatic approach for us means that we understand what Ukraine is going to gain after the war, apart from the compensations, apart from the ability to rebuild the damage and offer people a comfortable life. So an outcome of the negotiation process for us is going to be a very different new security architecture that would never allow similar aggressions from Russia to come onto Ukraine. Now we are open for questions.
Hi, good afternoon. Italian National Broadcasting Radio. Two questions. The first one: what would be put on referendum, and when can be done the referendum during wartime? And regarding the new security architecture that you are speaking about, Italy should be one of these countries involved. So what role do you expect from Italy in this new architecture for Ukraine's security? Thanks.
As for the referendum, then surely the security treaty, for it to be entered into the international law, it has to first be enacted by the referendum, then enacted by the parliament of the securing countries, and then the Ukrainian parliament. The referendum cannot happen today as we are at war. We have the Marshall's Law. The procedure for the referendum in Ukraine is clear and well balanced, and we will launch the procedure of launching the referendum only once the Russian troops leave our territory. When they go back to the borders, at least to the positions as of 23rd of February 2022. Then the Vienna Convention is activated, stating that any treaty signed by a country in the presence of foreign troops, in the presence of occupational troops, will not be deemed effective. So the referendum will be launched. We will lift the Marshall's Law only when the Russian troops withdraw. As for the guaranteeing countries, there's a big task force of our international lawyers, moderated by Andrei Yermak, who are talking to the potential security guarantors. They're having preliminary talks explaining our positions, explaining the fundamental grounds of the security treaty. Then legal groups go through the consultations, and all the countries, this is going to be an open treaty. So we'd like to bring in the Security Council countries plus Turkey, Germany, Poland, and some other countries, but it will be an open treaty, and any country can join. And Italy, as far as I know, has already stated that it is interested in participating in a treaty. Let me explain the interest. After this war, which is happening in the center of Europe, we know that the old formats of European or even global security have proven to be ineffective. They are overly bureaucratized. They don't want to take on responsibility and are unwilling to make some decisions that they are unprepared for. So if there is an aggressor country which invests its GDP in its armed forces and is going to take an aggressive stance, seeking expansion, and the smaller countries, smaller in terms of resources, smaller in terms of their spendings in their army and weaponry, are seeking effective mechanisms when they wouldn't just speak out and express concern, but have allies that will stand with them and take part in operations or provide arms or conduct defense advisor level consultations or bring humanitarian relief, give financial aid, and it won't happen like it did in Ukraine when on the first few days of war, Ukraine was fighting one-on-one with no support whatsoever. So we'd be very grateful to Italy if it joins the list of the countries offering our security guarantees, and many will consider this architecture designed by Ukraine, offered by Zelensky, and consider that those architectures could be a potential for the future. And this treaty that will center around Ukraine, the countries will be able to build another, a much more effective security architecture for the world. We have the time for last two questions. Now we hear the matters of security, guarantees a neutral status mentioned in negotiations more often. And you also mentioned the initial requests of Russia, like denazification, demilitarization, language questions, some disputed territories. Are these questions postponed or are they off the table? This is my block of questions. And the second, at what stage and how far um, has the preparation for the presidential meeting gone? Let me start with the second question, as it's more straightforward. The package of the documents is ready, and we have submitted our suggestions to the Russian party, saying that in principle this is time to prepare the presidential level meeting. When is that going to happen is rather a logistical question, as the Russians need to go over our suggestions, give some preliminary response. Now we are working at the working group level online, clarifying different points. So the package of the documents is ready. The key document is the Treaty on Security Guarantees and the Armistice, and the countries that Mr. Remark is reaching out to are in the loop, so we can expect a presidential level meeting to be held sometime soon. When it's too early to tell, that is a logistical issue. As for humanitarian bloc, there are two aspects here. Firstly, I'm not quite clear why someone else should moderate our cultural space, literature, language, etc. It's for it's for us to decide. This is our heritage, this is our country, and if there is outside intervention, it seems strange. And there's another dimension, that a country called Russian Federation doesn't have an adequate take on the world, and Ukraine in particular. It got bogged down in propaganda myths like denazification, all people wanting to speak Russian language, Russian speaking nationals being limited. We are a very open country. We are transparent. We have open borders. We have free mass media, unlike the Russian Federation. We are in open space, and all the problems that Russians have invented for themselves never existed in Ukraine. And when you start asking for examples, give us examples of denazification. Who are they? Unlike Europe, we don't even have any ultra right wing political groups who have their representation at the ground level and in the parliaments, whilst there are such groups in some countries of Europe. We don't have any. So please speak the language of fact. Stop force feeding us the propaganda that you've been living 8 years. Let's take it fact by fact and discuss them. If we tell Russians, if you bring in the concept of Russian language and destroyed the cities like Kharkiv, Mariupol, Sumy, the entire east and south of our country with the majority of Russian speakers there, how can we sell Russian language to them? They don't want to speak the language. You've bombarded the cities where people were free to speak any language in their everyday communication. And then you go in and say, we'll launch a cruise missile so that you can speak Russian in there. It's illogical. And when we talk it through during the negotiations, they're beginning to see sense. They're beginning to see that it's not logical. We bombard Kharkiv, and should we come in and then say, let's switch to Russian? That's why we killed you, to convert you to Russian. There's a clarifying question. So these questions will not be addressed during negotiations. Do I hear you correctly? We don't see sense in that. We may begin a different kind of discussion, like the mirror question. You want a Russian speaking school in Ukraine? Just an example. Let's have a Ukrainian speaking school in Russia then. Let's mirror. Would you like to have a Hungarian school in Ukraine? Let's have a Ukrainian speaking language in Hungary. We want it to be commensurable on terms of parity. Then it makes sense that the countries could support the programs, etc. But it can't be something forced on us. We cannot be discussing the principles of our language, like the language, literature, the cultural space, overall, the media space. This is regulated by the government. This is our inner world. No one can come from outside and impose something on us. Let's impose some languages on you and make you talk them. So it doesn't make sense to go back to these issues. Next question.
TV9 Bharatvarsh, and my question is that you did say that this round of talk, it was more pragmatic, more practical approach happened during the talks. So when can we expect the next round of talks? How soon can that happen? And again, a question of how soon can the presidents also meet?
Let me give you a straightforward answer. We are in a state of war, so every day means a number of people who are going to be killed and some infrastructure that will be razed to the ground by the Russians. So we are pressed for time. We developed a different formula. Continuously online, major legal, military, diplomatic groups are liaising and working out the details of the treaty. We came to Istanbul to define the intermediate positions that will underpin the key documents. In our opinion, as we see it from the Ukrainian negotiating team, we're seeing a possibility to sign preliminary agreements and we can launch the presidential meeting process. So perhaps in 2, 3, 4 days, we will have a final version that will be confirmed by the Russians with the amendments, and then we can reach the next round of negotiations.
Daniel Boffey from the Guardian newspaper. It's not quite clear to me what the Russian negotiating demands that you're actually engaging with are. Could you please spell them out very clearly? Is Russia accepting of this new international treaty of which you speak with the Permanent Security Council members as securing that? Secondly, what is Roman Abramovich's role in the talks? And thirdly,
whose role?
What is Roman Abramovich's role in the talks, in the peace talks? Thirdly, do you believe anyone in the Ukrainian negotiating team was poisoned in early March? A yes or no? Thank you.
Look, in terms of what will the Russian party accept or decline is for them to say, but we know that a way for them out of war has to be an adequate one. And the formula of security treaty suggested by our party and President Zelensky is a way to bypass the bilateral treaty on war and peace between Ukraine and Russia, as we feel a bilateral treaty between Ukraine and Russia would not be well secured, and Russia can always breach bilateral agreements. And as for multilateral agreements where Russia would undertake its commitment before other guaranteeing countries, it would be an opportunity for the Russian party to leave this war saving face. And therefore, in principle, they are accepting the treaty as there can be no other formula, as Ukraine, based on the preliminary results of the war that we have attained so far, where Ukraine has shown fierce resistance to the mighty army of Russia, Ukraine has to be given fundamental key security guarantees so they don't get another war. So I believe we will specify the treaty in a few days, and this treaty will be acceptable for all the countries guaranteeing our security, as it is a voluntary commitment that are taken before Ukraine. Secondly, about Mr. Abramovich. In the media space, it's been known that he is a very effective go-between for the delegations. He's moderating the process to prevent misunderstandings when the parties would make some statements and the other party would misconstrue this statement for the logistics of the negotiations. So Mr. Abramovich is very effective in his mission of being an intermediary between the delegations. As for the poisoning, I don't quite get it. It's a speculation, some conspiracy theory meant to impose pressure on the delegations, creating some mysticism and detracting the delegation from the essence of the negotiations. The delegation on both sides have been working. Mr. Abramovich is working, I'm working, so there's no poisoning to speak of if everybody is performing. Mr. Mykhailo, somehow during the negotiations there was a statement made by the Russian delegation that Russia is going to drastically reduce its military combat operations in Kiev and Chernihiv regions. What was that about? In my opinion, purely psychologically, the Russian party has a different take on the war, on the conflict, knowing that the consequences for Russia in all domains, reputational, financial, military, economic, will be devastating for Russia. And they know that Ukraine came out with a constructive offer of this treaty and to make step towards us. They stated they would drastically reduce the combat operations in Kiev and Chernihiv regions. We have not seen any abatement of fighting. We have seen the same assaults launched on our cities. There are some minor maneuvers, but they haven't become common. And secondly, we realize it could be a tactical move when some units are just regrouped from a direction which has been denied to them, as we have powerful defenses there, and they are willing to redeploy their troops to Donetsk and Luhansk area and Mariupol, which are of great importance to them. And since they are running short of reserves, they could regroup their forces and show it off as a step towards us. But we're a normal country in Ukraine, unlike Russian Federation, for values and morale. We will consider that the Russian Federation, by making this decision, is making a step towards us and a step towards peace, towards ceasefire and withdrawal of troops from the territory of Ukraine. And my last question to you, Mykhailo, we are counting a month from the beginning of the Russian aggression. When asked afterwards, what images will be in your head? What are your personal takeaways from this month? The images before me, there will be a word, Ukraine, spelled in golden letters. This is a country that is now rewriting the history of the world, saying that you can be incredibly brave, you can be free, and sacrifice your life for these values. The country, the entire country, is standing to protect our right to be free. And the President of Ukraine, the government, all Ukrainians, the cities in the south, in the east of Ukraine, are fiercely Ukrainian, and they defy the armed aggressor barehanded. This is going to change the global morale. It's not just about the security architecture that is going to change. It's not Ukraine defending its statehood. It's about the course books of history writing Ukraine in huge capitals. Thank you. Thank you, Mykhailo Podoliak, advisor to the Chief of Staff of the President's Office, a Ukrainian negotiator at the peace talks with the Russian Federation. Mr. Mykhailo, thank you sincerely. Thank you, Andriy. All the best.
Completes our program for today. Thank you for being with us, and stand with Ukraine.